Welcome, everyone. Glad to see so many people here this morning. As mentioned, I'm Dan Mitchell. I'm president of the High Tech Business Association here on campus. It's great to see so many High Tech Business Association members here. As many of you know, we're the largest professional organization here on campus, and we've grown more than 30% in the past few years. A lot of that growth is due to the Easton program, or Easton Center now. So I'd like to just thank them for putting on this great event. They bring a lot of really great speakers to campus, and we're very honored to have Penny here as well today. For those unfamiliar, SAP is a worldwide technology company specializing in enterprise software. They are one of the largest software companies with almost 300,000 employees and are leading the way in utilizing cloud technologies to better serve their customers. Just last week, they also became the first technology company in the US to be awarded gender equity certification. We are really happy about that, and I hope many technology companies will follow your lead. Penny serves as the cloud evangelist and change agent, driving strategies across SAP's portfolio to customers and partners. She received, as I'm sure she's about to mention, her BA from UCLA in political science. Let's hold questions on the Iowa caucus till after the event. And unfortunately, she got her certification in management from USC's Marshall School of Business, but we're really happy that she's here today at UCLA. She joined SAP from Microsoft in 2015 with the mandate of creating a world-class global audience marketing function, and now oversees teams responsible for end-to-end engagement with the line of business industry technology, buying audiences, including thought leadership campaigns, programs, services, and support, and influencer relations. I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about that, and so please join me in welcoming Penny to the stage.
So team, so delighted to be here. When I was talking to Venda around what was really top of mind for students today, it's really all about digital transformation in the cloud. I'm very honored and humbled to be able to share my experience with you over the last 10 years. As mentioned, got my bachelor's in political science. I'm actually a born in the cloud employee because I came into the workforce during the dot-com boom and bust. And had a variety of roles within startups, which led me to an acquisition at Microsoft, where I spent pretty much the greater part of my career working on every cloud business that they've done, most recently on Azure, which is how I got to know SAP. And as we know, companies today are really looking on how do they transform themselves, big and small, and so I'll take you through a journey around kind of what are the mega trends that we should be thinking about from a digital transformation perspective, use SAP and our journey as a little bit of a case study, talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a modern marketer in the cloud age, and then lastly, just leave you with some nuggets on my secret sauce, which some students earlier today asked me what it was. So with that said, what is audience marketing, right? It's this concept that IDC calls really the segmentation of an audience to really unite what you're trying to sell to them, meaning solutions, and make it relevant for them. And so when we think about audience marketing from an SAP perspective, you know, I look at my CHRO, I look at my CIO, my CTO, my CFO, and we know that there's a growing trend in technology around buying centers to these quote-unquote lines of business, right? And so we see departments really deploying cloud-based solutions, really skirting over the CIO because there's a necessity and a demand for it. And then when we think about what does it mean to market to these audience in an integrated plan, my team really looks around like, what's the competitive landscape? What are the different geography factors that are happening in the market, right? Like, why would Brazil buy an HR solution versus, you know, a company in Germany? We look at loyalty, right? Because as I talk through the trends in cloud, you know, the sale is not really what's important in a cloud-based model. It's actually the deployment of that. And so how do you build loyalty with your customers in an upsell, cross-sell perspective? And then when I think about, you know, innovations in the digital age, I want to start with some trends to help you understand what's happening in the market, and then sort of dive deep into some case studies that'll help make it real for you. So when we think about innovations, A lot of companies the past few years have spent a lot of time on simplifying processes and being smart in the way that they run their front and back offices. But what we're starting to see is more than 60% of CEOs expect to really purchase and invest 15 to 50% around what's called innovation. And from an audience perspective, what we've seen is a lot of new roles. We now have chief digital officers, chief innovation officers. What are those guys going to do, right? And this is all what's happening in terms of the trends, and it's the perfect storm, right? Because you've got cloud that really drives costs down and is a commodity to build. You've got mobile, where you've got more users, disparate workforces that need instant access. You've got social, where it's an always-on function, and you need to connect with your customers real time. And lastly, big data. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're helping companies and iconic brands really monetize their data. So in terms of a bigger trend, I think a lot of you have heard this concept of the Internet of Things. When I first heard about it, I was like, oh, it's wearables, right? Like I have my Fitbit, I've got my Apple Watch, but then when we started really digging into it as a phenomenon at SAP, we realized that it's more than that. And what you see here is that by 2020, Gartner is saying that we're going to have 26 billion connected devices. And IDC is stating that there's going to be $13 trillion invested in this concept of Internet of Things. So what does that mean? And so when we think about it from an SAP perspective, we started back in the 1970s as being a mainstay provider of ERP, right? Pretty much every global brand, and I think I have the statistics, 74% of companies run SAP. But over time, during all those trends, we've had to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we make ourselves more relevant to customers? And actually, how do we deal with customer demands? Because they're asking a lot more from us. And so we wanted to make sure that we're able to simplify technology, that we're able to simplify processes for them. And now, in this digital age, be that trusted advisor for them as to how we propel them forward into this new economy. And that means building new business models, figuring out ways to be able to drive more net new revenue streams, and really being, forward thinking in terms of their business. So when I think about SAP and the masses that what we have, here's some, I would say, data points to give to you. I talked about 75% of companies or more really running us. We've got 17 million transactions coming through our network, and that's through Ariba. At any given time, there's a company that's joining our network every 1.2 minutes. So very, very vast footprint, and that came through both a buy versus build perspective, and that's what I'm going to get into next. And so when I think about what we did from an SAP standpoint, and this was probably a 7-year journey, so a little bit before my time, but I can sort of make sense of it. Every company, whether it's large or small, is going to come to that realization of, I want to be an innovator, I want to get to the cloud, I want to offer new things to my customers. How do I do that? And so we came to that inflection point, and it's either a buy or build mentality. And we actually did both. So we went on an acquisition spree and really bought some of what I would call the things that extend our network, and I'll talk about that next, with SuccessFactors, who's a complete HR talent solution, with Ariba, who was the #1 business leader in transactions with supplier and buyers. We also bought Concur, which was the leader in travel and expense. We bought another company called Fieldglass, which is not up here, but if you think about it, contingent workforce and talent management at a resource level, very important to large companies that we work with. And then we built some stuff that actually didn't work. So we built some stuff called Business by Design, that I think there's a Harvard business case study on that, and every single time we talk to senior leadership, they kind of cringe about it, we don't want to make that mistake again. And it was really the underpinnings of what we wanted to do with now what's called HANA, right? We knew that our customers wanted an end-to-end platform that gave them diversity in deployment, whether it's private cloud, public cloud, multi-tenant, single tenant. And so that's really the underpinnings of what the HANA Cloud platform is. And we call it the digital core. And we call it the digital core for customers because everything else that we do is a surround sound for them. And so we wanted to make sure that at the application layer, we had something to offer to our customers. At the platform layer, we had something to offer to our customers. And at the infrastructure layer. And the two things that customers always talk to me about is, Penny, I need extensibility and interoperability. I've got this stuff you've sold me. How am I going to extend it? How am I going to extend it into new business models? And then you've got all this other stuff that you want to sell me. So how do I make it interoperable, right? Like, I bought Concur, so how does it work with SuccessFactors? Or I want to buy HANA, but I got our ERP on-prem. And so it's all these business solutions that we have to sort of tailor to our customers, really based on where they want to go. And so if I think about some case studies, and I'll get deeper into some of them, one of the things that SAP's really been good at is sports. So we are in the crux of Super Bowl 50. I just got back from San Francisco yesterday, and it's absolutely crazy. And I don't know if there's any 49er fans here, but I had the great opportunity to go to Levi's Stadium and really look about what we're doing from an NFL 49ers sports analytics perspective. And they're using all of that data, again, that monetization of data, to really look at what are their next recruiting strategies. What is the optimal way that players need to play the sport? Like, what are the things and attributes that they need to look at in athletes to sort of make the math work? And it's really amazing. We've done the same thing with the NHL. And so if you think about statistics in hockey, there's tons and tons of statistics in hockey. And the Hockey League came to us and said, hey, how do we monetize all of this data and actually make it an external revenue stream for us? This concept of brand to fan is what we call it. And so we built applications for the NHL. We've got kiosks at every game that show game stats for each of the hockey players. And it's all real-time, live data, always on for our customers to really drive that engagement. So I think that concept of, and I'll talk about it later, of, as marketers, are we scientists or artists? It's a little bit of both, right? Because the data tells you a lot of different things, and it's the way that companies are monetizing today. So let me sort of transition to some of the digital marketing trends that I've seen. Obviously, I own a lot of different areas of business for SAP. So I think about everything from finance and ERP to HR, which I talked about, as well as industries, because that's been sort of the way that we go to market. And so as a marketer, I really challenge my team to think about what is it going to take to really romance our customers and give them what they need, and what are the attributes as marketers, short-term and long-term, that we need to invest in to be able to do that, because the market is changing. And so when you think about where we are today from a buyer's perspective and a technology perspective, and I'll give a little bit of love here to this side of the room, these are the things that buyers want, right? They want to keep up with trends. They're expecting a personalized experience. Some of the students I talked to about earlier, we were talking about how retail can really reinvent the way that they do things by having this immersive digital experience in the stores, right? And I talked a little bit about how Ralph Lauren back in the day, and now I'm really dating myself, was the first one that really did kind of like the store within a store, right? Like the pop-up store, the experience, and now you've got the Sephoras of the world and JCPenney's and sort of this phenomenon on how you bring online to offline. And then there's, what do we need to do from a technology perspective to make sure that we're meeting the needs of these buyers, right? Automation in marketing to really understand who they are. Predictive analysis to give us a propensity model on what the buyer would want next. And then this concept of social media collaboration, right? I tell my team, in this day and age, it's really exhausting to be a marketer because your customer's always on, they're always gonna want more, they always wanna speak to you, whether it's different channels, and you have to always be one step ahead of them. So I think this is a great slide that sort of gives you the idea of where sort of things are shaping, and an organization that we work very closely with is ITSMA, so I appreciate them sharing this with us. And then when we think about marketing's priorities and shifting, I can say from an SAP perspective, we're probably going to be 50-50 here, right? Because if we think about SAP and even some of the other Fortune 10 companies, the brand positioning is always going to be key, right? Like that's one of the things that I really noticed about my work at Microsoft and at SAP. We spend a lot of time thinking about how that brand experience comes to life. So I don't see much shift here, but if you look about thought leadership, demand generation, and marketing technologies and tools, there's definitely going to be a shift a little bit. And then this concept of understanding the buyer, right? What does your buyer need? Who is your buyer? Because in a digital age, your buyer is always changing, right? And with new business models, you have to reinvent who your buyer is. So I think this concept of understanding your buyer, really connecting with your customer, and really truly connecting with them is really going to be key. And then when we think about the 6 areas for marketing change, what you see here is that there's peaks and valleys, right? And as marketers, we're always going to have inflection points that we work on. So whether it be capitalizing on insights or being a brand steward, which I talked about, or representing the voice of the market, right? I think one of the examples that I gave the team was Uber, right? I mean, we just heard that Yellow Cab went out of business. Like, they're basically bankrupt. There's no more Yellow Cab. But why? Because Uber came about as a very disruptive technology, and what they were able to do was do just that, represent the voice of the market, right? People wanted access to a car that smelled better, that was nicer, real time, they could click a button and just get into it. And they really monetized a totally different business model because Uber doesn't actually even own any cars. The same with Airbnb, right? Largest providers of what I call hotel rooms or hotel stays, but they don't own a single hotel. But what did they do? They represented the voice of the market because there was a lot of people that said, hey, I want the convenience of staying in someone's house, and I want it more regulated, and I want it more real time, and I want it like frictionless, right? This concept of like frictionless purchase, frictionless buying in the digital age, in the cloud age is really, really big. So there's just some examples in terms of inflection points and things that as marketers we really need to think about from a where the market's going and what you're going to need to do to stay ahead. And then when I think about my buyer, 70% of the mindset of my buyer is actually made up before they even do a search online. You know why? Because they're highly regulated by peers and influencers. And so my CHROs, they're human resources people. They love to get together and talk to each other, right? So they're going to actually do what their peer does. Same with CFOs, right? Like, they're not very digital in the sense of where they get their information. They like to talk to other CFOs and be like, hey, what are you guys doing from a back office perspective? And what I should be thinking about from a cash flow management perspective or M&A perspective. And so really thinking about like, what is that exploration stage for your buyer and where they're at and where they're getting their information and who they're speaking to and what are those peer influencers that you need to harness is super important. And then in terms of digitization and cloud, that evaluation stage becomes more and more critical. I think with every single cloud business that I've worked on, we've always thought about like, how do you get the customer to try and buy before they actually deploy, right? Because that's what customers want in a cloud world. They want security, they want to know that the thing works, that it's seamless, and they're not going to have this huge, huge bill around implementation and services after. And so how are you able to give them those proof points in this evaluation stage? And in some areas, that works really well. I give the example of Salesforce, right? You can go on that website, you can provision an account in 10 minutes, and within an hour, you actually get a phone call. That's actually pretty good. And in other areas, it doesn't work, right? In the enterprise space, it's a little bit harder to have that sort of immersive experience with a proof of concept for a customer. And then lastly, the purchase stage, right? And this is what I talked about around loyalty, especially in a cloud-based model, is, you know, the sale is only as good as your deployment. And what we've found is in subscription-based models that you really need to do more of that nurture on the back end after the purchase, because you want the customer to renew, you want to reduce churn, and obviously you want to sell them more, right? Goes back to my point around extensibility. So if they bought Concur from me, I want to make sure that I can sell them success factors. And so that customer loyalty piece almost becomes equally or more important in a cloud subscription-based model than actually the purchase up front. So just some nuggets to think about as you're evaluating, you know, areas that you want to focus on, how you want to be a modern marketer. And then I want to talk a little bit about my case study with the MBA. So big shout out to the ladies in the room. I don't know if a lot of you know, but Pam L. is the CMO for the MBA, and so she is a woman that looks over 100 different franchises globally in a very, I would say, male-dominated sport. And so the NBA came to us and they said, Penny, less than 5% of our customers will ever experience an NBA game. What are we going to do about that? And they also said, we have a lot of data. We have player stats that date back to the heydays of, you know, Magic Johnson and all the other guys. And they said, we want to really figure out how to do this real time and really engage the fans in a more immersive manner. And so we took all of that data that they were really crunching maybe manually into you know, a data set and really started to see how can we make a website that's immersive where somebody can come and look at different stats, like the top number of jump shots that a player has done in their career, and really make it engaging on the web. And then we took it a step further and said, hey, you've got this problem where 5% of your employee or your customers will never attend a game. Like, how do we do that digitally? And so they started web streaming some of the games. And then what they did is they sort of made the experience on the web like the floor. For instance, who doesn't like to see the Laker girls, right? So like, how do we get the Laker girls at halftime to sort of perform on the web and really give that fan that engaging experience, because they're never, ever going to be courtside. And so these are some of the areas where we're helping really iconic brands be modern marketers. And I would say from an NBA perspective, we saw over a 60% increase in their web traffic, and the time that folks were on their website was significantly improved, given all of the stickiness that we did, both from a data perspective and from an engagement perspective with the games. So with that, want to really talk about what's the personal journey ahead for you. And again, going back to the question that I got earlier today around like, what's the secret sauce? So one of the things to think about is, you know, as marketers, as technologists, you know, there's an art and a science. And I love this, this infographic because it talks about what are the trade-offs, right? What is it that you're trading off to be a scientist versus being an artist? And where are some of the areas that you really need to combine those two? And the first one for me is, again, knowing your buyer. Right? So the data is always going to tell you who your buyer is, whereas the artist side of marketing is going to tell you what do you want to serve up to your buyer, right? What does that data tell you that you need to be creative and really engaging? And it being Super Bowl, I don't know if you guys remember last year, Volvo did a big online campaign where they actually in Cannes won an award around, you know, their every single time that there was like a goal or some play, they had to do like a hashtag Volvo type of thing, and you know, it was like they had to forward it to someone, and they got really creative around how to engage the fans online and not pay that $2 million sticker price for actually, you know, advertising during the show. So again, really thinking about smart ways to engage your audience in this new digital age. And then when I think about how do we define success, a lot of what we talk about with success factors is talent management and this new level of workforce, right? We have a lot of millennials in the workforce. We've got a lot of folks that are older in the workforce, and so how do we bridge the gap between these two and be able to have them learn from each other and cohabitate together? And then also when you think about consumer buying behavior, they're just not that interested in the bottom line, right? They want to know how a company drives their products, how it drives their people, and what are they doing from a social responsibility perspective. And I think those are all really great attributes to think about as you start really defining where you want to go, right? Like, what are the products that you want to really work on? What are the people that you want to work with? And then what is that social sustainability, responsibility that you want a company to sort of give back to you? And so I thought that was really helpful in terms of, you know, bridging the gap in terms of the workforce, and also things to think about in terms of companies you either want to work for, or when you get to a company you want to work for, ways that your consumer is going to think about that company now moving forward. And then my approach, the secret sauce. Obviously, I came from a liberal arts background. I've been in technology for more years than I can count, and I never, ever thought that I would be here. But one of the things that really helped me was recognizing patterns and getting in early. I was in the cloud when there was no cloud, with co-location and data centers, with the likes of Exodus, who doesn't exist anymore, and probably you don't even know what that means, or Digex, if anybody knows those terms. Also, really understanding where the market is going. So taking full responsibility for where you want to go and being able to create those patterns in the market and getting in there early. I think the second thing that really helped me is taking risks and having that sixth sense, right? There's a great Winston Churchill quote that says, success is failing over and over again with enthusiasm, right? And so if you're not challenging yourself and getting out of your comfort zone and trying to fail, then you're probably not pushing the boundaries of what you can actually do. So think about that. And understand that successful people are people that take risks, whether it be calculated based on where you are in your family life or career. And most of the time, whether it's in your life or in your career, you're going to have to make decisions based on 70% of the information. You're never, ever going to have the perfect information. And so don't be shy about that sixth sense, that sort of gut in your feeling, and really taking that risk. And then lastly, in terms of leveraging your strengths, right? I always tell my employees, write down the things you love to do, write down the things you hate to do, and then write down the things that you're not good at, right? And then that tells me you're really good at the things you like to do because you keep gravitating towards them. You probably need some discipline in doing things that you don't like to do, like your expense reports. And then there's probably these things that you're just not really honed or skilled on, that you either need to, as you grow in your career and become a leader, find ways to plug those holes with really talented people, or learn ways to make that happen and not be a gap for you, right? And I always encourage people on cross-discipline, whether it's product marketing, product management, always doing a tour in sales, right? Because you're only good as your last sale, and I think that sort of pressure point is really important for a marketer to get in their heads and really being close to the customer. And then lastly, have a plan and visualize, right? Things don't happen by accident. I mean, there is luck. I agree, there's a lot of luck. But I think the most successful people have been able to say, hey, there's some key milestones I want to achieve. I want to get to a plan. I have a visualization of what that plan is. I know what that network looks like that I need to get there, and be articulate about it and be forward about it, right? Because I think that there is this phenomenon of paying it forward when you have a plan and you know what you're after and you are able to articulate and ask people for it. So with that, Just want to say that we are trying to build bridges with UCLA and all of our campuses and university alliances. We have a huge opportunity with our partnership with Thomson Reuters. We're actually coming to campus, I think, next month for a 2-week boot camp where we're going to actually bring a bunch of equipment, have our HANA data processing on site. We're going to churn through some election data, and students will be able to enter to go either to the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention. So if you are interested or you have mentees in the younger levels that are interested in that, obviously I'm a political science buff, so I had to make the shameless plug, it being an election year, and I cannot call Iowa. I'm still waiting for that. Just wanted to call that out for you guys. And then lastly, I think it's a great time to launch, right? What I've understood from the statistics is that CEOs know that they have to do something around the cloud and digital transformation, right? We know that people that are investing in it are getting various returns in terms of market share, ROI, and so forth. And so I think you have an opportunity here to really be that change and really be able to articulate what it means to a company to reinvest themselves, be a digital transformation story, and really go out there and get after it. So with that, I want to open it up for questions. Yep.
Thank you very much, Penny. I'm curious about your opinion on the public versus private cloud. If eventually we'll see all companies move entirely to a public cloud, or there'll still be a split, and what that means for SAP in the future.
Great question. So when I think about cloud, fundamentally feel customers always need to have a choice, right? I think based on borders and regulations and highly regulated industries like financial services, healthcare, there's always going to be a need to have a either private or hybrid cloud environment just based on what the government is mandating, right? And we obviously have a lot of safe harbor laws, Patriot Acts in Canada that we need to work with at a global level. And I think fundamentally, choice is really important for customers. I also think that it's not all or nothing. And this is what I advise customers as well. Like the journey to the cloud, especially if you're a multinational corporation, has to be very thoughtful. And so maybe you start with a few applications in the cloud that are not mission critical, and over time you get a little bit more, I would say, used to it, and you essentially build that journey to the cloud. But I think for other companies, like for instance startups and mid-market that are quote unquote born in the cloud, a multi-tenant public cloud is always going to be a great solution for them because it's a commoditized market, right? So they can get the best deal in terms of costs, right? And then contracts and so forth. So I think longer term, SAP's on that journey to continue that concept of choice and knowing that it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So hopefully that helps. Yeah. Yeah.
So with a number of more and more decision makers involved with cloud processes, it's not just the CTO, it's like department heads and so forth. I've seen a lot more requirement on solution selling. So as a marketer, how have you helped your salespeople kind of transition from like a more technical selling to solution selling?
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, we're on that journey at SAP as well. So a couple of things that we've been trying to right size. The first one is random acts of marketing. As an organization, you have to be so tied into your sales teams and be able to deliver what I call marketing enablement, because if they don't know what you're doing and they don't understand how it's influencing the pattern of selling into their customers, then you have failed. So I think that, first and foremost, that connection needs to happen. The second one is really being able to arm the sales teams with information that solves business solutions, right? As product marketing, historically, we've always wanted to talk to customers about speeds and feeds because we've always been selling into IT. but now we have to sell into the CMO. So when I think about our hybrid solution, which I didn't talk about but was part of the MBA, and I have another example with Red Bull, we're selling into the CMO, and the CMO, he or her, only cares about, hey, how are you going to extend my brand? And in the concept of Red Bull, they started off as an energy drink that sometimes you could mix with vodka. And then they started, taking on exports and sponsoring exports. Then they started to do really interesting partnerships like taking a man in a balloon to the moon. And then they started this whole merchandising franchise that becomes this whole circle, right? Because they want their customer to go to 7-Eleven, they want them to go to the exports, they want them to see their stunts, then they want them to buy the merchandise, and they want the cycle to go over and over again. And so we try to arm our salespeople with that value prop to make it real for the line of business buyer. So hopefully that helps. Yes?
Hi, Penny. Thanks for coming. You touched upon interoperability. Do you see that the trend going to more providers being able to communicate with other devices, or is it more within company, within this SAP, different products?
It's both. So, and I'll give you 2 examples. I didn't really get into channels or channel marketing, but obviously that's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of extensibility. So it's twofold. We live in an app age, and what I've seen from an app transformation perspective is twofold. The first one is companies want to have regulated apps and develop their own apps that help their productivity within their customers. And so we see a lot of enterprise customers building apps to help drive more productivity. Concurrently, we see a lot of app proliferation to help drive more consumer engagement. And so when I think about financial services and banking, right, it's all about how do we make a frictionless process for people to bank online. And where I think about the extensibility and the interoperability, it's really around the apps. And at SAP, if we think that HANA is our digital core and the platform for our customers, we think the surround sound is the apps. And so with SuccessFactors, and I'll get geeked out here for you, we have a HCP platform that helps extend some of the tools and things that happen within SuccessFactors. And so it's a real better together story when we go sell into customers. And we know that if a customer is buying $100,000 of SuccessFactors, again, going back to being a scientist and knowing the data, that they're going to need some HCP because they're going to want to do some sort of extensibility, whether it's an app or something like that. So I think you'll continue to see that phenomenon, and I think that is a huge, huge play for extensibility that we'll see growing more and more.
With regards to big data and all the information that companies now have on us, how do you measure, how do you draw the line between responsible uses of that data and irresponsible uses of that data as a marketer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So having my experience at Microsoft and both at SAP and being these global brands, there is significant regulation on how you can actually use the data that you have. And so, for instance, we have a lot of what I call do not call lists that masks, some of the sensitive data. Even with healthcare, right? You've got a lot of HIPAA requirements in terms of where that data needs to come through the pipe, and it has to be highly regulated. Encryption is a big play around that. And so I think as a marketer, it's hard, right? Because you want access to all the data, but you can't sometimes always get it because of regulations. And that's where you have to think outside the box and be very smart to, again, think about patterns, right? So it's not, what the individual data gives you, but maybe what are those buying patterns that you're seeing? And you can get that through just plain even web traffic or social traffic, right? The other things that we're doing from an audience perspective is we're doing bubble charts around words. So what are the words that our audiences are using quarter over quarter that sort of give us the insights on themes that we need to talk to them about? Words could be like security or talent management, or whatever the case may be. So I think there's smart ways to get over that, but we will always, as marketers, deal with that data sensitivity, which is good and bad, right? It keeps us out of jail. Other questions?
Is there a plan to kind of integrate these companies into the SAP portfolio to have a consistent user experience, or are these separate tools like an analytics tool or a marketing tool, and will they remain separate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer it twofold, and I'm glad you brought it up, because this by far has probably been my most interesting project that I've gotten there. So we were at a decision point whether we wanted to be a house of brands or a branded house, right? And the company, for whatever reason, sort of delayed the way that they treated acquisitions, right? At Microsoft, it was 365 days. We ingested the brand. You were in the company. It was very methodical. This was a very different approach. And so what we've done the last 9 months is go on this brand journey with all the acquired companies and decided to be a house of brands and be consistent across how we think about the brands, the texture, how they proliferate themselves in media. And so I think that's been very helpful for us from a brand-facing perspective. The second thing that we're doing is just that around interoperability. So when we think about HANA, and S4 specifically, both in the cloud and on-prem, there is a roadmap to actually get every single one of those acquired companies to be a hook-in into that. And so with our CEC hybrid solution, we've just launched that in November. And then we also have an iteration of our ERP system in the cloud along with finance. We are getting there with success factors, with talent management, and probably the last one to go will be Ariba and Concur, just based on the nuances that we have with those companies. But obviously there is a roadmap, and I think that's one of the things that we sell to our customers, right? That in the end, the suite is always going to win. And we have a suite of services that are game-changing for them.
In a lot of customers' mind, and I'm talking about like end customers, not the B2B CIOs or IT managers, SAP is perceived as a lot of legacy software provider.
Yeah.
However, like you mentioned, there's a lot of acquisitions and there's a lot of efforts being done. Do you take that into consideration, how the end user or a student like us looks at SAP?
Absolutely. I think that is one of our biggest challenges, right? And it's a challenge for, I think, a lot of them, right? I mean, if I think about IBM, who we have co-opetition with, I mean, they're dealing with the same thing, and I'm sure Oracle is too. But one of the things that we've really fundamentally tried to do is sort of change the perception of the company. I talked a lot about sports, so sports sponsorships is a way to sort of do that. The second one is around our corporate platform around youth. So we do a lot around youth and how we treat youth and talent of youth and so forth. The other big one is around healthcare. So how are we changing the age of healthcare, whether it be a aging workforce or not? And so we've sort of picked a few areas where we really want to focus from a corporate perspective to really change that perception. I think second to that, we are looking at how do we reinvent ourselves to startups and to developers, because honestly, they're not thinking that SAP is the platform to develop their solutions on. And so that's going to be more of an evolution than a revolution for us. But we are trying to really focus on that. For instance, really focusing our sales team on building the next pipeline of unicorns, right? Like, what are those fast-growing companies like Under Armour, who really sells a lot of great shirts and shoes for my kids, but is really trying to change the way that people engage with the brand. So there's some ways that we're really looking at that, and it's obviously top of mind for us, as is with other companies, right? I mean, if I think about Microsoft, right, they sort of put a stake in the ground around being a cloud and devices company and still trying to sort of change that image. Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say is your single biggest challenge to being a cloud marketer? Is it, getting over some of the myths of what is a cloud, or is it something else?
Great question. I don't know if it's a challenge because I obviously have been a cloud marketer for a while. I think sometimes my biggest challenge is finding the talent that is willing to have that appetite and stomach, right? Because being a cloud marketer, you have to be able to deal with ambiguity. You have to be able to, be agile and flexible. And folks that are really entrenched in old school ways of marketing have a very hard time to bridging that gap, right? And so my biggest challenge has been able to find folks that can be innovative, creative, and have, again, that sort of stomach to sort of drive it. Because in most sense, when you're working on cloud-based businesses, they're incubation businesses, so you're working with very, small budgets. You have very lofty goals to prove, models for the businesses. You really also have high expectations of management. So, you have to think about, can you work under that level of pressure, right? And then I think fourth, you have to be able to, sort of move around, right? It's a very startup mentality. So maybe one day you're doing this, but the next day you're doing this, and the next day you're going to be doing this. And you have to be able to be like that jack of all trades, and that has to feel really good for you. So to me, as a leader, that's probably fundamentally the single most, I would say, challenge if I have in terms of being a cloud marketer. Yes?
How did you make the initial transition from a liberal arts background into technology?
That's a great question. So right when I graduated from UCLA, I spent a year and a half at the UCLA Alumni Association. And at that time, the problem set that they were trying to solve was how do they engage alumni more when they don't come back to campus. And they started this was the early days, so I'm dating myself. They started having an online job board, but nobody knew what an online job board was. And they started to have email forwarding at UCLABruins.com. That was brand new back then. And so I was like, oh, that sounds fascinating. I'm like, let me learn more. I don't know anything about this stuff. So I would go over to Wilshire and meet with our technology folks. It was every week, once a week meeting, and be like, hey, how are we doing on this? Hey, how are we doing on that? And so it's building out those quote unquote e-benefits for alumni. And then I started to take a different spin, and I went to a few startups where I did channel marketing. So I started back then, I'll use the word affiliate marketing. I think it's still around. So I started in affiliate marketing, and then I went into more channel development, channel management with web and co-location and sort of that age of data centers, and then started to do more stints internationally because I wanted to do my international experience. And then you just wake up 20 years later and you've been in technology forever. It's crazy. So hopefully that gives you an idea. And I think it was, again, if I think about risk, it was nobody else wanted that job. They're e-benefits, what is that, right? So take the risk and do the things that people don't want to do and see where it goes.